episode of Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome back. I just saw you a moment ago. Still have no idea why a light is flickering behind me, but welcome to Surviving the Survivor. It is the podcast that not only promises, but delivers on our promise of bringing you the very best guests in all of true crime. We've been going wild for a couple of days. It's been hard to keep up with all the news out there. Luigi Mangione, of course, the big story over the past week. We are going to get into another story that is absolutely huge here in the Miami area and New York City, and is going to take on a life of its own. The New York Times doing a lot of reporting, CNBC doing a lot of reporting. And it's primarily because it's about three brothers of extreme privilege here in the Miami Beach area who went on to create a massive fortune in real estate. Two of the three brothers, and two are a set of twins. They are the Alexander brothers, and we are going to get into what happened to them today. But it's got shades of Diddy. Before we get there, let me just introduce the best guest. You've got Rich Kaprowski, retired NYPD homicide detective. He spent 30 years there. A lot of them with the 2-5 precinct, the 25th precinct, which is East Harlem. He was telling me he was a detective there. He worked on everything from aggravated harassment to homicides, and I'm sure he worked plenty of sex crimes, which we are going to talk to Rich about as well. And then you've got Nima Rahmani, not just a prestigious California personal injury attorney, one of the best. He is the president and co-founder of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Graduated from UCLA. He and the professor can each join Mensa and take battling IQ tests against one another. But he graduated UCLA at age 19, graduated Harvard Law at 22. By the way, Kaprowski graduated Harvard at 17, but who's keeping score here? Yeah, who's keeping score? And there you go. Nima's got extensive trial experience. And he's a big-time legal commentator, mainly because he appears on our show. And then you've got the professor, Prof. Poe, Joe Poe, whatever you want to call her. Professor Joe Patudo is Professor Emerita at the University of Nebraska. She's taught all over the place, a very bright legal mind. And yesterday, pretty much had all of STS Nation against her because she verbally announced that she's not a fan of dogs, and we're a very dog-friendly show here. Ethel and Fred could not believe it. When I got home, they were asking me all about it. They were in disbelief. COE is, I love Iceland. That's a weird comment, but so do I. I'd like to go. I've never been. So let's dive into this. Just some background information on these guys, and there'll be some photos. And, not that this matters, but when I first shared this story with Carm and the COE, despite the horrific allegations, both of their immediate comments were, wow, they're so good looking. So these are good looking guys, Miami guys in their late 30s. Their father founded a company called Kent Security. You've probably seen the badges. It's one of the larger private security firms in the country. So they grew up in extreme privilege and wealth. They grew up in Bal Harbor, which is literally, I could almost throw a tennis ball from where I'm at and hit that area. It's a very prominent, wealthy area, upper class in Miami Beach, along the stretch of Miami Beach. And today, three of them are arrested for some really serious charges. By the way, their firm worked on a deal. It was the largest, most expensive ever property sold in Manhattan. It was a $238 million Central Park apartment that they helped close on in 2019. Again, they are arrested today for well over a decade. Police are saying, and prosecutors, that the prominent real estate brothers, now remember, 2 are in the business, a third is not, but the third was socializing with them, that they quote unquote repeatedly and violently drug, SA'd, and R'd. I can't say the words here on YouTube, but you know what I'm getting at. Dozens of women. Nima, let's start with you. This is Shades, and here are 2 of them. The party's over for the real estate brothers, and I got to be honest. At this point in the game, I don't know. I know the names, but I don't know who is who exactly. But Nima, these are serious charges. These are Diddy vibes. These are 2 guys that were drugging and doing horrible things to women against their will. That's the other brother on the right side and the left side there. When you heard this come down, by the way, they had a presence in LA. You know, they were doing work all around the country. And you deal with celebrity types. Your reaction to, once again, we just heard about Luigi Mangione. Now these guys from privilege, obviously Diddy, tons of money. What's going on here and what's happening from a legal perspective now?
Joel, my initial reaction is, wow, the Southern District of New York, they strike again. I'm reading the indictment signed by U.S. Attorney Damian Williams. Of course, he's going to step down, but now he's got in his office 3 of the biggest cases in the country right now. I mean, setting aside the DA's office, they're going to handle Luigi Mangione, but you got obviously Diddy, probably the biggest trial happening right now, sex trafficking case out of the Southern District of New York. And before you got Mayor Eric Adams, handled by that office, not sex trafficking, but 2 other sex trafficking cases, the former Abercrombie and Finch CEO, and now you got the Alexander brothers. And really, when I think of sex trafficking, you know, we're really seeing a boom in these types of cases, because what makes it trafficking and not consensual sex is that force, fraud, or coercion. And you see these brothers, the allegations are they're drugging and essaying women over a span of decades. And sometimes these cases can be hard to prove when there's one victim, when victim after victim is telling the same story of physical and sexual violence. Very hard to overcome. The other interesting sort of tidbit is they're also facing parallel state charges in Miami-Dade County. You don't see that too often. That might be because of jurisdiction or statute of limitations issues, but interesting when you have the parallel prosecutions at the same time. Can happen. We saw it in Derek Chauvin. We saw it with the McMichaels and Ahmaud Arbery, but oftentimes you don't see those parallel or back-to-back prosecutions.
Yeah. CO, if you can help me lift up Nima right there. So if you're there, so we're not, there we go. I just don't know how to do it. She knows all the special keys here. Rich Kaprowski, retired NYPD detective. Let's start with this. I mean, you're dealing with 3 rich guys. Obviously, you're looking at them right now. Again, very wealthy people. Do you take the same sort of precautions? The arrests were made today. They were apparently in 3 different locations right here where I am in Miami-Dade County. How do you coordinate an arrest like this? So we'll get into other details of how you investigate this in a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, to coordinate that, I mean, there's teams of obviously the FBI was in on this, so there's multiple teams that are going to tack up and find out their locations or locations that they frequent, where they're living, and then they're going to ascend on those locations. Once they bring them in to, you know, get all 3. And then they'll bring them to a central location, but they'll split them up, and they'll go from there on either questioning or bringing them straight down to their, if they're already indicted, straight down to court.
So they're going to be held right now in Miami-Dade County Jail, which is also known as Guilford Turner Night. Is not a very pleasant place for those who watch the show. Donna Adelson was there on the women's side, but while they're questioning them, since there was a federal indictment today, and these are obviously guys who are smart with resources, what are the betting odds that they have lawyered up already, or just not talking at all, or investigators going to try to talk to them separately right now?
Yeah, I mean, they're probably not speaking to them. They're probably going to, because with the feds, with my experience, is they'll bring them in, and then they'll set up with their attorney. They'll have an attorney present, and they'll bring them in, and they may try to speak to them with their attorney present, or they'll just go about their indictment. And I mean, my experience when the feds come in and they have an indictment on you, it's a pretty tight indictment.
To you, Professor Petuto, some of this stuff is just kind of difficult to stomach, but we're going to go through it. And some of this, again, can be triggering. So for people who are victims themselves, just be aware of that. But this, in a lot of ways, sounds like what's going on with Sean Diddy Combs. The indictment alleges that they would throw these really glamorous, quote unquote, international parties, the kind of things that you would imagine would happen a lot in Miami. And then they would bait these women and then choose from what they call a wish list with the letter R in front of it, an SA word in front of it, with a wish list of women that they wanted to attend. I mean, forget being a lawyer for a second. What do you make of this? You know, again, Diddy, Jay-Z was just dragged into it. So people with tremendous wealth. What's going on here?
Well, it's obviously entitled people. It's obviously people who think they can get away with anything, and for a while they did. It strikes me as men who just are out for risk. Because in this case, I looked a little today, and there's at least one news story from a few years ago that was saying that one of the brothers told a colleague, you know, I might get arrested for something like this. Just know. Now, if you think that might happen, and you continue to engage in the behavior, I don't think it's insanity for purposes of a legal case. It's probably it's probably not insanity in terms of most ways that you'd look at it as a psychologist, but it is exceedingly crazy. And you wonder what I'm going to try to see if I can say this in a way that is, I don't even know what word to use, polite. I mean, it isn't as though we're living in Puritan Massachusetts, where if you wanted sex consensually, you couldn't get it, and you couldn't get a lot of it. So what it is that drives these men to do this is absolutely beyond me. I do think that the Diddy trial now, there were at least 3 women, I think maybe more, who filed civil suits here. But I do think the fact that these stories are starting to air and are being read is bringing victims out, not only in the particular case, but victims who have suffered from other abusers. So I think that's part of what we're seeing. But it's, I don't have words to describe it. I just think the allegations are horrific. The conduct is beyond despicable, if proved, if true. And there's certainly a lot of evidence here.
Yeah. I mean, Rich, to that point, from your perspective, I mean, there's a comment here, which I'll have you address too. What's happening to humanity, which is basically what I just asked Professor Joe Petuto. I mean, you're the biggest part of your job is observing and interacting with people as a retired NYPD detective. Is there a shift in society? Like, what do you think is happening? That's question number one. I'll come back to you on investigative stuff in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think humanity this has always been going on since I've been a cop. I've seen the worst in people. I've also seen the best in people. But like seeing people hurt women, children, take someone's life. It's out there. It's not like it's just beginning. But as the professor said, I think also with Diddy, that being publicized now, that everything happening, all these other women are saying, "Hey, this happened to me with these brothers," and now 30 women have come, over 30, I believe, came forward. So there are good people out there, but I don't know, the new generation, I don't know what's going on with it.
Nima, to you, I think we're all just kind of shaking our head. A lot of these questions are going to be similar to questions I've asked you previously about Sean Combs. And, we haven't talked since Jay-Z's name got dragged into it, but that's yet another massive name. These guys, huge in the real estate world. The charging documents, Nima, say for well over a decade, the prominent real estate brothers conspired to, quote unquote, repeatedly and violently drug, SAR dozens of women, and you just heard Rich say something like 30 women have apparently come forward. They just unsealed the indictment. How do you go about taking allegations? And these guys are younger, obviously, than Diddy, but how do you go about kind of dotting your I's and crossing your T's as prosecutors in this, to then be able to go into a court of law and prosecute the case that's not just based on, quote unquote, hearsay?
Well, here's what I want to do as a prosecutor. But before I get there, I'm going to talk about what men like this use to attract women, and it's money, looks, and fame. No one's kicking down my door to be with me,
Nima,
right?
come on, don't short sell yourself. I know you bought that $229 million penthouse too.
But I mean, look, it's just, and I'm not at all blaming the victims, but you see this consistent theme, right? It can be someone in the entertainment industry, movie industry, someone with a lot of wealth and fame like these brothers. But here's what I look for as a prosecutor. I look for two things: corroborating evidence and a contemporaneous report. It can sometimes be challenging to prove these cases when the report is years or sometimes even decades after the fact. I understand the psychology of an abuse victim, why they don't report it right away. But jurors sometimes have a tough time believing the testimony of a victim, even though the law says they can, when it's not reported right away. Obviously, you want to report a SART kit, some medical documentation, right? Some report to law enforcement. And even if you look at Florida law, it's actually very interesting when the statute of limitations can be 3 years, 2 years. But if there's a report within 72 hours, there is no statute of limitations in some cases. So that's how important that immediate report is. And then, of course, that corroborating evidence, right? Something.
Nima, I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm just curious. I mean, would we have any idea what percentage of the women who came forward may have filed some sort of medical or police report, either gone to a hospital or gone to a police station?
It's low, and I've prosecuted sexual assault cases. The percentage of women that do that is low. The percentage of cases that are filed is low, and the percentage of perpetrators that are brought to justice is even lower. We're talking about less than 10% of people that are accused of SA or ever convicted. And in some instances, it's even less than 5%. So, but what is very helpful is the sheer number of victims. And Rich kind of touched upon this, but the feds don't charge someone. They don't go to the grand jury to get an indictment until they have a bulletproof case. It's ironclad. And, like I said, a juror may have a tough time believing one victim, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at that point, you're overwhelmed. And whether it's a Cosby, whether it's an Epstein, it doesn't matter at that point. Jurors are not going to disbelieve a dozen, 2 dozen, 30 victims like we have here.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to Rich on this in a minute about Diddy. That's interesting because these are Hamptons guys, Miami guys, and they could have crossed paths. I'm going to ask Rich about that in a moment. But Joe Patudo, the other thing that when you talk to people in Miami and you talk to people in New York City, just like they said with Diddy, this was an open secret. People here in Miami say they're not surprised at all. These guys were arrogant. They were jerk offs. Some of the words that were been tossed around. But what about the fact that it is this open secret? Is there an issue, I guess, from a legal perspective that people aren't either coming forward earlier to stop these crimes from escalating? Is it because they're too powerful? What do you think's behind the fact that this stuff hasn't been litigated sooner to prevent other crimes?
There are a lot of things that go on. In the first place, the notion that it's an open secret doesn't really get at what it is that people thought they know. They might have thought that these brothers were aggressive sexually, that they had these wild parties. But whether that meant that they knew that some of the things that equate to crimes and serious crimes were also known is quite a different question as to what's known. And there's generally, whether it's an essay or an R or anything, we are trained not to come forward if we only have a rumor. We're told as kids, don't be a tattletale, look for the best in people. That sort of training, which is in many ways really, the right thing to tell kids, also makes people pretty reluctant to come forward unless they think they're absolutely sure. And the problem then is it's like having a puzzle. I have a little piece and some information, and you do, and there are lots of other people do, but none of us have enough that we can say we're sure something really happened. And that covers a lot of the sort of the witnesses, the other people around. For the victims, I'm sure it's extraordinarily difficult. I'm sure that for a lot of them, they feel as though it's partly their fault for getting in the position that led to the crime. They may not want their family to know. There's still a stigma attached to this sort of thing. They may not want their family to know. They may decide the law, and this would have been true in the past, that nobody's going to do anything about it anyway. And now they're taking on a powerful family or rich people. And there's no sense going through all that trauma when at the end of the day, nothing's going to happen. So a lot of things converge. What I think is changing now is that with these cases, it's becoming clearer that law enforcement is taking it seriously, that their prosecutors willing to go after it, and that you do have a pretty good shot of being heard. That doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a conviction at the end of it, but you have a good shot at being heard. And so I think the dynamics are changing. I hope that the behavior is changing, and that's hard to tell because some of these cases started 20 years ago. So you don't know, whether there are people starting today who are doing the same sort of thing. We won't know that for a few years, but there are a lot of different, I've written about this. It's to some extent, it's the whistleblower issue. If you come forward, you're the one who's going to lose a job. You're the one that takes all the grief about it. And you have to be pretty resilient and pretty brave to decide you're willing to take it all on.
Yeah. And someone was saying earlier, Florida, obviously the mecca for crazy. So friends of Charlie Adelson, Charlie's older, and I don't think he would have been. Charlie was, in terms of like stature, was a wannabe one of these guys. I mean, these guys are worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars at a very young age. Their father is from Israel, I believe, and their father extremely successful in his own right. Back to Rich Kaprowski, who's our detective. Rich, how difficult are these to investigate because of this? Because women don't always want to come forward. You hear that it's, in the dozens of women now who are coming forward. How do you begin this sort of an investigation? And isn't it true, like where there's smoke, like Nima was basically suggesting, there's fire? You get one woman, okay. You get three women, what? But now you got like dozens of women. It's got to tell you something. So what do you do from an investigative standpoint here?
So as you get one victim, you'll get a story from them of what happened. And again, a lot of them are embarrassed. They feel, that nobody's really going to take them seriously. And then, when one comes forward, and then you get the second, third, and fourth, as we said earlier, you do look for the similarities in what happened to them, each one. So you'll start putting those pieces together of, okay, this is what was happened to victim one. Victim two had the same thing happen. The locations change, but they're usually doing the same acts. So you can build it.
Oh, we just lost it. So Nima, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's powerful too for these women coming forward, that they see other women are coming forward, and I'm sure we're going to have more women come forward now. I don't think it's just going to be 30, and again, as in the Diddy case, Now, how close are these related? Do they know the same people? Did they run in the same circle? That's what law enforcement's going to look at also.
These are the mugs right here. You see Alone Alexander and Orrin Alexander. Without looking, yeah. Rich, I lost your picture, but I'm gonna pop you out while you're figuring that one out. Oh, here, he's back. He's back. So here are the mug shots. Nima, what a difference an arrest makes. These guys going from this, from this to this. It's going to be a real reality check. Someone made an interesting comment. I did not know this. For full disclosure, apparently the three have retained 3 female attorneys. What is the strategy there? Is to, I guess, eventually get some sort of sympathy from a female attorney to a potential panel of juries, correct?
Well, the conventional wisdom is you don't want an aggressive male defense attorney cross-examining a female victim. So you always, on the criminal defense side, hire a female attorney in these types of cases to conduct that cross-examination. Could be sexual assault case, could be a case involving domestic violence, Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, right? I mean, there's a reason why, the cross-examination was conducted by Camille Vasquez. So this has been the case for decades in the defense bar.
Yeah, and what about this, Nima? Cooler by the lake. Do you think these guys get bail? I'm sure they could meet whatever amount. Wouldn't that fuel Diddy's claim of racism? Interesting point. 2 different jurisdictions. This is Miami. There, Diddy's in New York. But what about that?
I don't think this should be granted bail. I mean, you're talking about very serious allegations. So you look at 2 things, right? When you're talking about bail: risk of flight, danger to the community. These are brothers that, whether it's the ties to Israel or access to a lot of money, they're obviously flying all over the country. They can fly all over the world. They can just peace out. That's one thing. When we're talking about drugging and essaying women, that is very dangerous. And the allegations here go back to the time when they were in high school. They're talking about really terrible things, gang essay, trains. So if I'm the judge and I'm considering a danger analysis, these brothers are very dangerous and they should be in custody until trial.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that is going to be the case. 2 assaults, COE is letting us know, happened in the May building, MEI, in Miami Beach. Very affluent building. No surprise to me there. Joe Patudo, to you, as we continue to look at mugshots of Alone and Orrin Alexander. These are real estate scions who are now in a lot of legal trouble. Joe, can one of the guests, the professor, explain a bit more what trafficking is in legal terms? Why that instead of just the R and the SA charges? Why is that kind of seemingly always tagged on to these charges, to the other charges?
Well, because it's combined with, in the first place here, there's more than one. It sounds, I mean, whatever trafficking means generally, usually means that you're using force and other kinds of things, or you're moving somebody across the state line or in a geographical area. Here, it's like a commercial enterprise. I mean, the way they were running this, from the allegations, it's numbers on top of numbers, and so that the trafficking is a new way of describing this. I don't think 15 years ago trafficking would have been the word used, but it is the one that's being used today.
Yeah, I mean, Nima, anything to add to that in terms of from a legal angle, why that is included?
Absolutely. So for a federal crime, you need a federal jurisdictional hook, right?
That's
you need
true.
some component, interstate commerce, right? The movement across state lines. That's what makes something a federal crime versus a state crime. And let's talk about the difference between consensual sexual activity, commercial sexual activity or prostitution, and sex trafficking. So obviously, I think consensual between adults is legal. Obviously, minors can't consent. What makes it prostitution or commercial sex is the offering of goods or money, right? We know that. But it's still consensual otherwise. What makes something sex trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. You need one of those 3. So if someone is drugged, an SA, obviously that is not consensual. So you'll see that repeated in all of these federal indictments, complaints, because that's what you need to make something sex trafficking, that forced fraud or coercion.
This is we're getting a law lesson. You got Nima graduated Harvard at like 3 years old, and then you got the professor. So we're going to learn some of this. Is going to go right over my head. But back to you, Rich Kaprowski. There was an interesting question before. I mean, these guys were definitely. You just saw one of them married a supermodel. There definitely had to be in similar circles to Sean Diddy Combs and other celebrities. Would you, as NYPD, if you're working this case, would you look to see if these guys attended any of those parties? I mean, I know it sounds a little crazy, but or the other way around, if Sean Diddy Combs was at one of their parties, is that something that would matter to you, at least at the beginning or the middle or the end of the investigation as you're looking into it?
Yeah, I mean, we would absolutely look into if they were at both, if they knew each other, if they were at both parties, because then we have more potential victims and more witnesses. So we would go through interviewing all those possible witnesses that were at those parties, and again, that's when your numbers of victims grow. Some may not want to come forward right away, but then when you approach them and say you were here, what'd you see? And then comes out, yeah, well, I was SA'd also, or, so you could potentially get more victims or find out more information about both perpetrators.
Yeah, and detective, let me ask you, these guys have all the money in the world. Why, just like Sean Diddy Combs, why didn't these guys take off? They knew that the heat was on them. They knew the feds were investigating. And by the way, as a public service here, this is, if you are, and there are a lot of people in Miami who watch, and New York, if you believe you're the victim of any of these people or have knowledge of their criminal conduct, you're asked to call 1-800-CALL FBI, 1-800-CALL FBI. But Rich, they knew the heat was on. Why didn't they get in a private jet and go somewhere? Is it just hard to pick up and change your entire life? I would do that if I knew the other option was spending the rest of my life in prison.
Yeah, I mean, we never really know why they wouldn't run, but I think at this point, coming from a privileged, background, maybe they're feeling, daddy's gonna get us out of this one, or or the money we could hire the highest paid lawyers to help us out. Who knows? I mean, I've talked to people, to guys that were like, yeah, I knew you were coming, but well, why didn't you run? Like, I don't have the means. These guys have the means, and why they didn't is I'm not sure. I'm glad they didn't, but
yeah, 100%. And I am sure Diddy is wondering why didn't he take off either. Nima, you mentioned this off the top, so just to go back to it, Orrin Alexander and his older brother Tal and Alone Alexander, who is Orrin's twin, they're all arrested at their homes today, but they're 3 separate homes, 3 separate arrests. But the twins also face separate state felony charges of SA. It's actually SB. The second word is battery, connected to 3 separate assaults. This is all according to arrest warrants that were released today by prosecutors in Miami. What's going on here with the kind of the concurrent state and federal charge? And I'll add that Kathleen Fernandez Rundle, she's been here for 1,000 years as the DA. Is this also, I mean, is there a political aspect to this? Everyone knows her down here. Does she want to get, her name in the mix as holding these guys accountable?
Well, Joel, I got to say, every prosecutor in this country is either elected or appointed by someone who is. So if I was here to tell you that the decisions are purely made for non-political reasons, I'd be lying. Now, I don't know about this particular case, but I can tell you that I think the reason why we're seeing these parallel prosecutions are for venue and jurisdiction issues and statute of limitations issues, right? You got the federal prosecution out of New York, right? But some of the conduct happened in Miami-Dade County. So what they want to do is, both for the sake of the victims, because they deserve their day in court, but also to put maximum pressure on these two to work out some sort of deal, right? So they're going to throw the kitchen sink at them from both angles. It was clearly a joint federal, state, local operation here, both in terms of the arrest, but also the investigation. So I think that's why we're seeing the parallel prosecutions.
Look at this. When a crime hits home, close to home, friend just sent me a video, can't see anything but police lights. She's the neighbor and said everyone was shaken up. Avi, I don't know if you want to show that, COE, that's your call. Want to be respectful to your friend. Look like common criminals to me. Let me, Rich, that's an interesting comment. The criminals have a certain look. I mean, you got this idea that they're all going to be kind of thugs with tattoos that have a "I love mom" tattoo, maybe, or whatever on their arm. But these guys maybe don't look like the typical, criminals. How do you approach that? I mean, these guys are definitely, obviously, if they're convicted, they've got evil intentions, just like any other criminal.
Yeah, I mean, they look clean cut. They're look, I'm sure, well-to-do dressed. Not what I'm used to speaking with. I could tell you that much. But and going into an investigation like that and speaking to these individuals, that's what you have to take into account when you speak to them. There's a certain way you could talk to somebody who's from the street, and there's a way to talk to somebody who comes from a privileged background. You have to kind of, speak, on their level.
Mm-hmm.
Me personally, I'd rather be speaking to someone from the street because,
right. Rich, I know you're not going to take this the wrong way because you're a New Yorker, but these guys would probably be thinking, hey, this guy's just a New York cop. We're these filthy rich real estate guys. So how do you talk to these guys?
I mean, you just try to, again, as we were saying, similar with the Luigi Mangione, you have to come in on their level and just listen. This is nonsense. What's going on? I know, and try to get on their side, that you're with them, and that you're trying to go to bat for them, and hopefully they'll open up to you. And the same way can work with somebody from the street too. You just got to get to them to kind of, if it's lying to them and telling them, listen, I think, the victim's full of it. But what went on, and half the time those guys will open up to you, and then some will just tell you, listen, I'm not speaking.
Yeah. I can guarantee these guys are not. I'd be shocked if they were speaking.
I would too.
Yeah, I think that they definitely lawyered up. Tracy, and by the way, they knew this was coming because, again, this went back to allegedly high school days. But Tracy Tudor, top broker at Douglas Elliman, which is a huge real estate company, Beverly Hills, and reality TV star for $1 million listing. Here we go with the NEMA connection, Los Angeles, $1 million listing, Los Angeles. I am still struggling to remember the details. Staying silent for so long has been damaging on many levels, and remembering now what happened feels debilitating. I mean, Joe, forget being a law professor. What does this comment do to you? Because it's really heartbreaking that this woman is a victim, claiming to be a victim, and, basically just stayed quiet. And now she's obviously having a tough time coming to terms with it.
Yeah, it's, victims get re-victimized, whether it's going through the trial, whether thinking about the trauma, whether second guessing every decision you made or didn't make. It's just awful. And I think, it's hard for me to put myself in that position, but I would think that one of the parts that would really be difficult to deal with is if you didn't come forward for whatever reason, because you were ashamed, because you thought nothing would happen, because you were worried about your career, because you were worried about repercussions. Bad as that is, then when you see someone else who was also victimized in maybe the same way coming forward, I suspect that also hits you pretty hard, that you didn't come forward, that somebody else did. And so now you are blaming yourself again for something you shouldn't feel blame about at all. So it's a terrible situation. You can only hope that the fact that this is coming forward and people are coming forward, and she will be able to come forward now, whether she can still have her case heard, whether she would be a witness, whatever it is, whether she's a supporter on the sides, would at least help get through some of it now that it's aired. But it's awful. You don't ask to be put in this situation, and here you are, and there's no answer that's a good answer for you.
Yeah, and to your point right there, Joe, from Sweet Carol Ann, the trauma of an assault is lifelong. Thank you for sharing this. I know it's tough. I was a victim at 13. Now I'm in my 60s, 50 years later, and my stomach is in knots reading Tracy Tudor's post. The trauma definitely never goes away. They are in custody. Going back to Nima's mentioning of the Southern District of New York, the U.S. attorney there is Damian Williams. He had stuff to say today, calling the brothers heinous alleged misconduct, saying it was just hideous. But it dates back, Nima, to when they were in high school. The number of alleged victims is therefore, quote unquote, quite significant, and officials expect more to come forward, he said, and goes on to say, it does take tremendous bravery for victims to speak out, but when they do, other people tend to gather that bravery as well. Bravery can be very infectious, which is a very interesting comment, and I hope it is. But these guys are, I think, 37, 38 years old, so they're in high school 20 years ago. Again, if you're prosecuting this case, and this is going to probably be primarily a federal prosecution, what do? Do you go back to all these people you went to high school with and you start asking questions? Are you a victim? Do you want to come forward? How do you handle this, especially because of the sensitivity?
That's absolutely what you do. And, obviously abusers tend to abuse more than one victim. And it's that first victim that comes forward that can often be a Me Too type victim, right? Obviously, in Diddy's case, that was Cassie Ventura, right? I mean, her lawsuit in November 2023 opened the floodgates, and more people came forward. We'll see in Jay-Z's case, is just a one-off isolated victim, or will more people come forward in the coming weeks and months? So with respect to the Alexander brothers, what you want to do if you're a prosecutor, take your best victims, right? You're not going to put 30 victims on the stand. That's just too much. But usually the sweet spot, in my experience that we saw with Cosby, Weinstein, some of these other cases, usually a half dozen or so, because that's enough where, the jury isn't taking weeks or months to hear a case, but you really have a parade, and I'm not using that in a bad way, but like, you're really strong victims that are willing to come forward. So if you're a prosecutor, you sit down, you review all the interviews, you talk to all the victims personally, and you say, you know what, I think these are the most credible. For these reasons, I want these victims to be on the stand. And frankly, I put on my victims that I think are going to hold up best during what will be an aggressive cross-examination. Because the only two defenses in these types of cases, are the sexual contact never happened, or it happened, but it was consensual. So that's how the case is going to be defended by the defense attorney. So you want to make sure that your victims can withstand that cross-examination.
Yeah, and in this case, there's all sorts of drugs also apparently being used that maybe they'll have some sort of like toxicology reports on. But Neem, I wanted to follow up too. So the federal indictment reads they don't name the people. They're not Jane Doe's, but they're victims 1 and 2. You kind of just alluded to it because you said choose your quote unquote best victims, the one with the most evidence to go against these guys. But why just 1 and 2? Why not victims 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, let's say?
Well, you don't necessarily need to charge all the victims. So you'll have victims that are charged in the indictment. And you also have what we call prior bad acts witnesses. That's under Rule of Evidence 404. And those are witnesses that come and tell the same story, right? That MO. Oftentimes when people are participating in these types of activities, right, and we see the drugs, right, the GHB, the mushrooms, the ecstasy, right, and the drinks, they're going to come and they're going to tell the same story. And, it can be Danny Masterson, it can be Jeff Epstein. It doesn't really matter. Whoever the abuser is, oftentimes they have the same MO. So if you show that pattern of conduct, that's enough for the jurors to believe.
I'm just doing a little on-the-fly research here about Ken Security, but it is a massive company. And you heard one of the brothers, the one who's not here, Tal Alexander, was serving as president of that company, and that name has now been scrubbed from the website. Wonder what Dad is thinking tonight. Curious about that. Detective, to you, I got to ask you this. We asked you why they didn't flee. That's number one, but this is an interesting dynamic. You're going to have three brothers at Guilford Turner Knight, which is a notorious jail. Very likely they're going to go to state prison. How did these guys do behind bars when they're used to hanging out at Nobu and other restaurants and, drinking and partying? How do these guys hold up behind bars?
Not well. They'll because the people in the jail will know who they are and where they came from, and they'll be tested, and they'll get abused. They'll be verbally abused, and if they can get their hands on them, they will, because other inmates don't really take. They don't like when guys that hurt women, children, anything like that come into jail. They kind of want to get their hands on them. So they'll probably be in some kind of protective custody for a while. They're definitely not going to do well. They're not going to like it, and I'm sure by the look of them, they may be pouting in the corner somewhere.
Yeah, I can tell you, we did a story. A guy named Charlie Adelson is convicted in a murder for hire plot, albeit he did throw the Latin Kings gang under the bus, but he had to be shipped out to South Dakota. And I have a feeling that people are not going to be in love with these guys in prison. They're going to have targets on their back the rest of their life. It's a great question for the professor. What determines if a case is a state case or a federal case, Joe Patuto?
Yeah, well, there's got to be a federal nexus for it to be a federal case. Typically, it's interstate commerce. In other words, the crime went over a state line. And that's, I think, what's going to be here. There are other things like, it's a federal officer. The drug, if it's a drug case, may have gone over state lines. In the United States, the primary, even today, jurisdiction for handling criminal matters is the state. So things are held at the federal level. RICO is another statute when it's racketeering influenced crime. Again, you can get a federal prosecution. Typical R or SA would be, no question, a state crime. This one, and as Nima talked about, since the victims were taken over state lines and also internationally, that's what really is giving the feds the trigger here.
Detective, back to you. I'm just curious because Nima was talking about how you've got to have a female attorney typically in these cases because you don't want an aggressive male attorney cross-examining women. But when it comes to, let's say a victim comes and knocks on the front door of the precinct, the 2-5 precinct, how do you question these victims? Where do you start? Where do you end? How do you do it? 'Cause it's got to be really gentle, I assume.
Yeah. Well, what I used to do is we in NYPD we have a sex crimes unit. So what I would originally do is sit them down and ask, if it was a female, I would ask, do you feel comfortable speaking to me? Or would you like a female detective? And some would say, yeah, I want to, I'd rather have a female. And I get, or no, I'm fine with you. I'd get a basic, story from them, what happened, get as much as I can from them. And then I'd give a phone call to our sex crimes unit, and they would make a determination. Sure, we're coming over and we're going to do a deeper, interview, and then I'll either sit in with them and we'll go over everything, and collaboratively make a decision on what steps to go after that.
Interesting questions that are keeping me from getting to some of the details that I'll eventually get to. We're probably not going to go 90 minutes tonight, so don't worry, Nima and Joe and Rich, but we'll go for a little bit longer because I got some more to get out here. I appreciate everybody being with us. It's been a wild week of breaking news, and we did make a commitment to bring you breaking news. I don't know how long I'm going to survive committing to that commitment, but we'll see. Cooler by the Lake here says, Nima, this is interesting. If they've been at this since high school, could some victims have been underage at the time? It's not even something I would have thought of, but they probably would have known younger women, girls at the time. And so maybe they're 19, 20, and now they're doing this to girls who are 16, 17. How does that factor in, Nima? Because that then is a crime against a minor.
It does factor in, and as a prosecutor, it's absolutely terrible when there's a minor victim, but it makes the case stronger for a couple reasons. Obviously, there are increased penalties for essay of minors, but importantly, minors can't consent. So that defense that this was all consensual goes out the window. So it's going to be interesting to see the feds, for instance, in the Diddy case, they supersede and add the essay of minors, because so far the defense in that case has been, oh, the freak-offs happen, but they're consensual. So it's terrible, but it makes for a significantly stronger case when there's essay of minors involved.
Yeah,
Yeah,
by the
and
way,
I would add, Joe, there's at least one reported case of a high school freshman, a 15-year-old, who reported this. And although I'm not sure that the reported story didn't say whether she ever went to the police, she did talk at the time to at least one or two friends about what had occurred. So that tells you that, not only there was one, but there's very likely to have been more than one.
as the father of a 10-year-old girl, that makes me want to smash these guys in the face. I was talking about this with a friend today. Why does money ruin any human? As a lot of it, that's a question that I don't know that anyone can answer. But we do. I do in Miami live in the land of Lamborghinis and plastic surgery and everything else, and it's very materialistic. And I think it does have impact on a while. Meanwhile, the impact on Kent's security, given these victims were less than secure. I mean, Nima, take a jab at this one. I don't know where the public is going to be in terms of connecting Kent's security. And obviously the father is going to have to distance himself from his sons now. But do you think the business will take a hit?
I think it will take a hit. And we've seen it with these other alleged abusers, right? Again, going back to Diddy, right? The biggest essay case right now, his net worth has taken a massive hit. Reportedly was worth $1 billion. Now it's just a fraction of that. And look, people are smart nowadays on social media. Everyone's Googling, everyone's checking. There's a reason that the Kent Security website scrubbed the name of one of the sons, because you're going to start seeing those bad reviews, right? I mean, people are good at connecting the dots and saying, hey, this individual works here. They're associated with this company. And that's the last thing any business wants, someone who's even being accused of conduct this horrendous.
Yeah. So the FBI assistant director in charge, a guy named James Dennehy, also spoke today. He basically praised the victims who came forward and said it's only possible because of the bravery victims shown coming forward. We will not allow this type of alleged behavior to go unimpeded. Predators forcefully coercing victims into sex acts cannot and will not be tolerated. The federal indictment was unsealed in Manhattan. This has been going on from 2010 to 2021. I mean, Joe Peduto, I got to stop again there, because when you look at the Diddy stuff, some say it goes as far back as 1991. This is an 11-year span. I mean, how can they let it go on so long? And again, I mean, are prosecutors or law enforcement culpable here at all because of the amount of time, or is it just the fact that they had their hands tied because they didn't have enough people coming forward till now?
Yeah, I think it's probably a confluence of another thing, but I think probably the largest part is either not having the information at all. I mean, the fact that it was talked about doesn't mean that the prosecutor's office knew and had enough, or police would have enough, or law enforcement would have enough to go investigate. And if you don't have witnesses coming forward and you don't have the evidence and you have other major crimes that are going on, I think it's pretty tough. Now, you don't know how long they've been actually working on this case or working behind the scenes to get information. And certainly in the last few years, there's a lot more attention being paid for it and a lot more resources are being directed at these sorts of crimes. The U.S. Attorney today said that they are not done. They're still putting together evidence in this case. And I thought, implicitly told people, if you've got information or you were involved at all, you better come forward now, because if we find out on our own, we're coming after you. I mean, those sorts of statements help these cases. I think it gives victims a feeling that, there's some support and there's some reason that they can come forward and have the case taken seriously. But 11 years, I'm sure, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but my guess is it's not simply 2010 to 2022. They were doing it in high school, and to believe that they graduated from high school and stopped for a number of years and then started again would strain my credibility to the breaking point.
This is a question for Rich. Thank you, Professor. Becky Ireland. I mean, again, Detective, human behavior as well as anybody. Do you believe that the parents knew nothing about the actions of their sons? I mean, people were whispering about this out loud for years. Parents can't be that naive. I mean, the guy was smart enough to start a huge company. What about that? What about them possibly turning a blind eye here?
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, I don't see how, if people are talking, how the parents didn't get wind of it, and we don't know. Maybe dad or mom grabbed them and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, you need to, you better knock it off." And listen, I have kids. You guys have kids. They can hide some stuff, and they could make themselves, seem like the little angel to mom and dad. But then, when they get out into the real world and on their own and making some money, they can, I feel that these three were privileged and just figured we're not going to get caught with this, and they got carried away with it, and now they're caught, and now they're going to cry about it.
Wow, it's so crazy how people who can be so smart and successful can be so incredibly karma's. It's a nice small house. That house in Miami is about $25 million. Easy.
Wow.
So you see the FBI going in. This is one of the homes. I don't know if the COE knows which home, but obviously photos of FBI agents going in there and looking for evidence. And I can tell you the other side of that house is definitely a lot of water. It's a home on the waterfront. I can almost guarantee you that. Let's look at some of the language from the indictment today. It is Oren's home. There you go. And for perspective, that's his home yesterday. And Oren on the right, his new home tonight is going to be the Turner Guilford Knight Correctional Center in Miami-Dade. Imagine going from this to that tonight. That's going to be a tough. I can guarantee he doesn't have a metal bed in this home here. I can assure you that. And I bet you
can go about 4 feet to his bathroom now.
It's crazy. So Nima, I don't mean to laugh about, but you guys get what I'm saying. The indictment here describes a quote unquote long running ST scheme. The second word is trafficking, that relied on deception, fraud, and coercion, with the brothers flaunting their wealth to induce women to attend parties, events, and trips where they were then attacked. They were lured with promises of romantic relationships and luxurious events, only to be drugged and assaulted. The brothers allegedly, this is all in the indictment, procured drugs including GHB and cocaine, and would sometimes spike women's drinks like Diddy is accused of before assaulting them. You hear all the Diddy victims, so they got woozy. Following the assaults, the Alexanders attempted to bribe victims with concert tickets and luxury items. So, Nima, let me ask you a dumb question, but now, do some of these victims have to come to them and say, yeah, I was at the Taylor Swift concert, here's a ticket? Or, like, how do they go now and prove, especially the drug charges here, How tedious? How tough? What are the steps here, and why is this? How specific? That's a nice small house. It is. I mean, how specific are they with the language when writing these indictments?
Well, ideally, if you're prosecutors, you have a toxicology report, right? Often that's urine. So if you don't have that, hopefully you have witnesses, percipient ones that are going to testify that it appeared that someone was drugged and they were under the influence, or a report to a friend or family member or loved one. So that's what you're looking for. Again, you can rely on the testimony of the victim by itself, but it can be challenging if it's just one victim or two. But you have a lot of victims here, and it seems like there were a lot of people at these parties. And what they've charged is a conspiracy, not just the substantive counts. Let's not forget, you charge a conspiracy. There's unindicted co-conspirators often, and they're on the hook for the criminal acts committed in furtherance of the conspiracy, unless they work out some sort of deal or they cooperate. So, oftentimes when I'm prosecuting a case like this, I look for two sources of information. Exes, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, and wives. They have a lot of information. But especially in a case like this, I look for former employees, Joel. They know where the bodies are buried, and they'll turn to save themselves. So I'm sure it wasn't just these three brothers that were procuring the drugs and women. And we've seen it with rich and famous people. Matthew Perry, he has an assistant, right? I mean, there's a drug dealer. You get those people to cooperate. It can be helpful.
Yeah. By the way, I've just upped my appraisal of this home to definitely over 50 million. I only had a partial angle, but when you look at it here, this thing in Miami is definitely $50+ million, no doubt about it. Detective, also in the indictment, trips were organized in advance, and the brothers allegedly shared photographs of women to make sure they were, quote unquote, sufficiently attractive. The brothers used dating apps or social media to contact them, or used party planners as intermediaries, according to the indictment. Now, we know, obviously, Diddy had video cameras. I have a funny feeling that these are not just clothed photos, but also in different states of undress. Detective, how important, how critical is this to your investigation to try to gather up some of these photos to be presented as evidence?
It's very important. I mean, that's what we would want to do, is if we know that these guys were sharing that stuff, we're confiscating, and I'm sure the feds already did it, confiscating cell phones, laptops, computers, everything electronic, to see what they have been passing, and back and forth, and again, as they always say, like their little black book. Nowadays it's all electronic. They're going to get a lot of names out of those computers, and they're going to even find potential more witnesses and even more victims.
Joe Patuto, to you. So obviously they're in Miami right now, but this is both a Miami indictment, state charges, and a federal indictment. So how does this proceed legally now? What are the next steps? They obviously have their mug shots in right now. I don't know where the third mug is, but I'm sure it'll be out if it's not already out. But so legally, what is next here in this winding road? These guys are in for a very long life now.
Yeah, and I was sitting here wondering about that, since I have neither read the indictment nor the charges that are coming out of Florida. But Nima, you said that you thought there could be concurrent prosecutions, but it can't be concurrent if you've got the same defendant being prosecuted at the same time in two places. I mean, they've got to have some sort of organizing around that. And multiple jurisdictions when it's the same crime can be pretty tricky. It's often the case that each jurisdiction wants to go first, and each jurisdiction wants to be able to manage first. They're going to have to talk it out. I would assume the federal prosecution, since they're would go first. But having not seen either of the documents, I'm only assuming, and I don't know that I'd be able to say I certainly wouldn't be able to say with 100% certainty, even if I had seen both of the documents here. But the one thing I think cannot happen is they can't prosecute the same defendant in two places at the same time. And I do know a little about the law of physics, and that can't work.
Well,
Yes.
that's definitely true. I'm sorry, Nima, were you going to say something?
So the way these parallel prosecutions work, and if I said concurrent, I misspoke, but they're really parallel, and the investigations happen side by side. But you're right, the feds will go first. It's the most serious crimes,
Right.
and oftentimes when or if, but usually it's when these defendants are convicted, they'll end up pleading in the state case, and sometimes they'll run the time concurrently because the sentencing guidelines in these types of cases are through the roof, and oftentimes there's so much time in the federal case that it really makes the defendants fold and not willing to endure a prosecution stateside. They'll just plead and serve all the time in federal prison, and frankly, federal prison is a lot nicer than most state prisons. So
By the way, these stories make me want to move into the middle of nowhere in like Idaho or Wyoming and just live in a log cabin and never have a cell phone again. Meanwhile, the COE is like, hey, did they have any other brothers? No, that's a joke I had to throw in there. Thoughts on one of these bros turning state's witness? What about that, Nima? This is your wheelhouse. Are they going to force one of the brothers to turn on the other two? Again, two of them are in the real estate business. The third was in the security business. What do you think? It's going to be tough to have family turn on family unless you're facing the prospect of life in prison, even though federal prison can be nicer. Still don't want to be there.
it's possible. You can cooperate and you get a 5K. That's the sentencing guideline section reduction. But you're really talking about individuals that actually participated in the SA. So you're not going to get much of a break in a case like this. Obviously, look, it's evidence of mitigation. And if they go to trial and they're convicted, I expect them to spend potentially decades in federal prison. So you might want to plead, accept responsibility, cooperate. They see the writing on the wall that there's so many victims that are going to come forward and testify against them. I think it's a possibility, but it's unlikely because I just don't see that significant of a reduction for someone that is a defendant and an active participant.
Yeah, but I don't know if you guys saw this in the chat. By the way, the CO yelling at me for that comment. No surprise there. But this was a teardown. They bought a crappy little $10 million house, tore it down, and then built this. Welcome to Miami. I read they had civil suits, Joe Patuto, were they already settled? I do not know the answer to that. If so, could that help the criminal? What about that, Joe Patuto?
I don't think they've settled. It already helped the criminal because I think what triggered this was the first lawsuit that was filed. But I didn't see anything settled. I don't even know that they've gone to trial or even close to trial on the civil. And they may now have to wait until the criminal prosecution goes forward. Will it help? As I said, it already helped some because this is how the case came forward. I don't know the extent to which the defense in the civil or the plaintiffs in the civil suits have discovery, but generally speaking, a prosecution is going to have access to much more information than lawyers in a civil suit are going to be able to get to, or at least be able to get to easily. I think it's more likely that this will help the civil suits, frankly.
There you go. From Kathleen McKeithen. Look at the COE. Take a picture of this comment, please. I'll allow you to get your camera out for a moment. Photograph or screenshot that, please. Rich, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm just curious. I'm always curious from kind of a practical standpoint. How does this work now? They're in custody in Miami and the feds are involved, and you heard Nima and the professor say that it's going to ultimately be a federal case. So how are they taken up to New York? When are they taken up to New York? What goes on in the meantime from an investigative standpoint?
So the feds do things a little separate than we would, but they'll probably, since it's going to be if they're going to prosecute it out of New York, they'll fly them back up here with a bunch of marshals, and I don't know if they'll take them all together or separate. I would think separate. They don't want to be putting them together, and bring them up here and then house them down in Manhattan
That
detention.
raised. I'm sorry, but that raised another interesting question. So obviously they're behind bars tonight. These three guys. How do they make sure that they stay separated from each other? It's a fairly big facility, but you don't want them having lunch together, right, or breakfast. You don't want them coming up with some sort of plan. Everyone in this jail is going to know they're in there. So what do you do with them? Are they in protective custody? How do they keep them safe and
Yeah,
apart?
I think they're going to be in protective custody, and they'll be in their own cells, separated from each other, and they'll be transported separately. That's how we would do it in the NYPD. We wouldn't keep defendants together so they can talk about their case and come up with a story. So we would separate them, and I would think that the feds are doing the same.
Some quick closing thoughts. She is the professor. She is a huge part of our show now. Once a member of STS Nation, now both a member of STS Nation and a best guest. She is the professor of law emerita at the University of Nebraska. And as I've said before, she's read every legal book ever written, cover to cover, including everyone in Nema's library. So, Joe Picciuto, your final thoughts here. By the way, I'm almost sure all three are in jail. All three are in custody, but for some reason, we've just got this. Again, imagine that you're living in that, and now you're in jail tonight. I think I'm getting a sick pleasure out of showing that. Joe Picciuto, your final thoughts.
Yeah, these cases seem to be coming fast and furious, and I've seen some of the comments in the chat saying the same thing. And it's certainly clear that if you have a lot of money, you have a lot more opportunity to commit this type crime, at least at this magnitude, than anybody else. But I guess I would like to put in a word for the well-to-do generally, that most people with money are not exercising or not using the money to engage in these sorts of behaviors. A lot of rich people are philanthropists. They support hospitals.
Good
They
point.
support charities. And I would just hate to get this to be, kind of a view of rich bashing, because what we're seeing is the worst of the worst. And what you can do if you do have access to resources and you do have this sort of mentality. And I guess I'd end with saying, Joel, that to the extent that these allegations are true, and they appear to certainly be well substantiated right now, I don't feel the least bit sympathy looking at them sitting there. I like the idea that they're not happy.
I agree with you, and I have no doubt that they are going to be held pending a trial. Detective Rich Kaprowski, 30 years with the NYPD, a lot of them in the 2-5 precinct. He's done it all from aggravated harassment to homicides. Interesting question. Any indication that dad was involved? The short answer is no. But Rich, before you give us your final thoughts, is that something that needs to be investigated in a sex crime? Do they have to look to see if either the father or the mother was either providing a place to do this, drugs, whatever it is? Do you have to rule them out? And your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think they'll do that. They'll make sure that dad wasn't paying for, the jet to fly, these women anywhere or anything like that. They'll start trailing the money, if he's involved, well, guess what? He can be in the next cell next to these three. But as a final thought, sometimes money is not the answer to everything, and I don't think it's going to be able to get them out of this one.
This story, I can tell you, I think is going to continue to grow just because of the backstory here. Very wealthy real estate guys, connected to Hollywood, connected to New York, connected to Miami. Good-looking guys. It's going to be a story that the media clings on to. So glad we got on this on day one here. Although, as we said before, this has been an open secret, at least in Miami, for a better part of a decade. Another open secret, one of the brighter legal minds is Nema Rahmani. He's a personal injury attorney, but so much more out of California. He's the president, co-founder of West Coast Trial Lawyers. If you didn't hear before, guy graduates UCLA at 19, and he graduates Harvard Law School at 22. One of the youngest graduates in the 200-year history of that law school. There have been a few good lawyers that have come out of there. No surprise here, Nima. They've denied all the allegations, at least the lawyers have on their behalf. What's next legally for them? What are you looking for? And do you agree with me that this is going to take on a life of its own in terms of a public media event?
I do, Joel. And, I expect them to come after the victims aggressively. And they have in the past. They've gotten restraining orders and threatened defamation lawsuits against the victims. So I think it's just going to embolden them. And, obviously this is a show about survivors, and we're seeing survivors of all types, including survivors of SA, have a voice. And I think the tables have really turned for 3 reasons. And I've been doing this for more than 20 years. I just represent victims now, including victims of SA. But in my previous life, I was a former federal prosecutor. I put more than 1,000 people in federal prison. And the reason I think that the tables have turned and victims are now getting a voice is because of Me Too and their strength in numbers. And we're seeing a lot more people come forward and report these types of cases to law enforcement, to medical doctors, to create the evidence that prosecutors need. And second reason is prosecutors are doing a better job. Prosecutors don't like to lose. They're risk averse. Sometimes these are tough cases. They can be tougher to prove than a murder case because oftentimes you're relying on the testimony of a victim instead of all the forensic and digital evidence that you might have. And I think the third reason, also very important, is the public awareness of SA has changed a lot. Look at the Menendez brothers and the support that they have. I never thought that we'd have a case like that. So it's because of people like you, Joel, your guests, and everyone that's watching that finally perpetrators like this will be brought to justice. So I applaud you all.
Oh, thank you so much. Really well said, Nima. I applaud you for being a good guy, a mensch, as they say here in Miami, and I appreciate you coming on with your expertise along with Detective Kaprowski and, of course, the professor, Joe Patuto. I got to put it out there for 3 weeks. The book, my book, Surviving the Survivor, same title, on sale for $1.99. I had to twist my publisher's arm. Only the ebook on Kindle. It's only going to last 3 weeks, but I really want to get the book into as many hands, not to make money like these guys, but I want my mom's story out there. So please share it. Share the podcast with your friends. If you like the show, please subscribe. Please hit the like button. We've got a Patreon page where the COE puts a lot of stuff like these guys' mugshots into for Patreon members. We appreciate the support. There was something else I was going to say. We got a ton going on again tomorrow. Shanna Gardner's in court. Corey Richins is in court, the woman accused of poisoning her. Some of these women, too, accused of poisoning. Oh, man, I'm doing Josh Ritter's show in a second. I forgot about that. But anyway, Corey Richins accused of poisoning her husband, 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl, and Shanna Gardner accused of a murder-for-hire plot against her husband in Jacksonville. Both are in court tomorrow. We're taking them both. Joe Patuto was sick of listening to me, so she just got off. Love you, America. Love you, best guests. Love you, LA, New York City, the NYPD. This world is not as crazy as it seems. We all still are somewhat in a stable place, I think. Everyone cling on to their sanity, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks, guys.